This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning, but we also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 6th of May 2021 and I am 2J.
I'm Tuam.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. In the Daily Nation, how India COVID variant made its way to Kenya. In the Standard, puzzle of SMS tweet that sunk Raila's ally. And in the Star, Uhuru and Ruto have not met in about 2 to 6 months. 2M, what do you make of this?
Before I tell you what I make of this, let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
In 1951, at the height of the Korean War, President Harry Truman fired his top general, General Douglas MacArthur. This move by Truman shocked the American public and the world. And that's because MacArthur was America's war hero in Korea. He was responsible for America's decimation of North Korea's forces. He had single-handedly devised some brilliant strategies and military maneuvers that helped save South Korea from falling to the invading forces of communist North Korea. Now, the public, therefore, was stunned by his sacking. What could he have possibly done?
Yeah.
MacArthur had made a cardinal mistake. He defied Truman's orders not to advance on Chinese positions in North Korea. You see, the Chinese crossed North Korea and took up positions to defend the North Koreans from the Americans. MacArthur went to Truman and told him he wants to bomb the Chinese, the hell out of the Chinese in North Korea. Truman told him not to. Pause. What does MacArthur do? He goes to the public live and tells the world that his boss, the President of the United States of America, is stalling America's victory. And should anything go wrong, the president was to blame.
Wow.
Live, he went and did that.
Yeah.
Now, the five-star general called the press and lambasted his boss. He threw Truman under the bus and claimed glory at the president's expense. And that's because MacArthur saw himself as a guy running the show. He thought because he was a five-star general, he was also commander-in-chief.
I see where you're going with this.
Now, what the American public did not know was that if MacArthur did what he wanted, America would have started World War III. It was going to be a game of mutual assured destruction. I mean, a whole president wouldn't be so dumb to start a world war over some people who were 4 continents away. So he fired MacArthur for threatening world peace. So a point here. William Ruto is General MacDouglas for you, well, MacArthur for you. Same WhatsApp group. He has accused his boss publicly of abandoning his duties and questioning himself, and also fashioned himself as a man who will save Kenya. In his mind, he thinks he is a co-president. That's why he calls the president Huyu Jamaa, or says in interviews, the president and I decided to appoint so and so. The bottom line is this: the president is not Ruto's equal. He is the president of the Republic of Kenya. He chooses what agenda is right for country. It's not Ruto's place to tell the president what to do.
True.
Whether bottom-up or hustler narrative is right for country, he should say it when he is out of government. Oh, and by the way, Ruto got fired long time ago. Matiang'i replaced him.
The super CS, right?
Absolutely.
So I think that answers the question as to why the president and the DP have not met in 2 to 6 months?
2 to 6
2
months.
to 6 months.
It's a very big window. Huh?
Absolutely.
So today, I'd like to share about Thucydides' trap.
Yes.
The trap that was identified by ancient Greek historian Thucydides.
Yes.
As he explained it, it was the rise of Athens and the fear that this instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. The Thucydides trap says that when one great power threatens to displace another, war is almost always the result. So in modern times, the trap has been illustrated, in fact, because in the past 500 years, 16 cases in which a rising power threatened to displace a ruling one, 12 of these have actually ended up in war.
Wow.
Why do I bring this up? Well, the events of the last few days in the ODM party got me thinking about the inevitable conflict that arises when a rising star like Otiende Amollo decides to threaten the ruling established power of Raila. So what Otiende did was bold. He was standing up to Raila, and it was both heroic and a little bit fatal. The resulting ousting of Otiende from JLAC made for a violent overreaction. The Rarieda MP was then replaced by Ruaraka MP TJ Kajwang. But it was a necessary overreaction. And this is because, firstly, ODM is a hardcore institution.
Yes.
It has survived because it is mean and unforgiving. Punishment for disloyalty is quick and brutal. Raila borrowed a leaf from Uhuru's expulsions at Jubilee, and his strategy to use anger as a useful instrument of control is working. The mistake Otiende made was to think that he was of the same stature as Senator James Orengo. Otiende gave in to fatalism instead of securing his political future.
Yes.
So while they were both actually reading from the same script with their stance on BBI, Orengo has earned the right to step up to his boss. He has earned his political stripes, and even then he does it carefully. And this is why he survives the purge.
Yes.
Otiende ought to remember the advice he once got when he met former President Barack Obama in 2006. Don't give up. If your focus is right, your principles are clear, and intentions are genuine, any bottlenecks cannot stop you. And here at the Fifth Estate, our favorite maxim is you have freedom of choice, but not freedom from consequences.
Oh, yes.
That's beautiful.
Very true.
I can see we have another General MacArthur
in the making.
Is that the theme for the week, for the day?
For the day.
All right, so I'm going to go off script, and today I want to continue on the thought that JM started yesterday. I want to argue that maybe Kenya has reached a point of fatigue with the same old faces dominating the political conversation. Do we truly live in a democracy if we continue to circulate the same members of the elite? Now, this idea of elite circulation isn't new. We've mentioned it several times on the Fifth Estate, and it actually originates from an Italian sociologist called Vilfredo Pareto. So Pareto established this theory of circulation of elites, in which he proposed that a minority will always dominate over the majority, and that history is just the story of one elite replacing another. And Kenya is really no different. Some political agents have run consistently for each presidential election with no success. Yet they want to convince us that next time will be different. In fact, I want to declare that our current political pool of political actors are engaging in mass insanity. Remember that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results.
Absolutely.
So my question to the public is therefore this. If our political candidates are insane and we elected them, what does it say about us? In my view, it signals a desperate need for change, some form of political rehabilitation. Otherwise, our existence will be defined by the perpetual swing of the pendulum from one type of elite to the other. And do not be fooled here. William Ruto is a member of the elite, masquerading as an everyday Kenyan. So the modern relevance of Pareto's theory is clear. The past 50 years or so have seen one elite replace another as the dominant ruling elite. In Kenya, this has been a game of ethnicity. Kikuyus and Kalenjins carrying the day and leaving the rest behind. However, between all of the elite fighting, there has been one very crucial voice missing, the voice of the people of Kenya. So to empower that voice of the people, I will end with two words. Do not fear a referendum. And more importantly, in accordance with Article 1 of the Constitution of Kenya, all sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya.
Indeed,
Kaboom.
it does. I like that.
That is it.
So we have so we have a three-part criteria that we use to break down the headlines. We ask ourselves, is it topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? Is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? I quite liked The Star just because I was intrigued about the 2 to 6 months that The Star was talking about.
Yes. I was equally intrigued by the text messages and the tweets in the Standard.
So between the Standard and the Star, who do we give it to? Guys?
So we toss the Daily Nation.
So there you have it.
The Star.
The Star?
Okay, the
Star
Star
gives us our winning heaven.
And now, our final thought. It is inspired by a book entitled How to Lose a Battle, Foolish Plans and Great Military Blunders. And today's episode is inspired by the chapter Gordon and the Siege of Khartoum. This book is written by Bill Fawcett.
I'm surprised that you didn't say Siege.
That's for, what's this guy's name? Kimayo.
All right, let's get to the point. So the Siege of Khartoum lasted from March 13th, 1884 to January 26th, 1885. And it took place during the Mahdist War. So in early 1884, Major General Charles Chinese Gordon, who Tuam tells us is the inspiration between Gordon's gin. So this general, he arrived to take command of the British and Egyptian forces in Khartoum. So he was tasked with extracting his command from the area before the Sudanese Mahdist rebels arrived. But he elected to defend the city instead. And the resulting siege saw Gordon's stronghold overwhelmed and wiped out a few days before help arrived. So the failure to rescue Gordon and his men was blamed on the British Prime Minister William Gladstone, that in a very strange turn of events eventually caused his own government to fail. At this time, the Sudan was a territory of Egypt, which in 1882 was invaded and occupied by the British, who wanted to safeguard their strategic interests. So the British oversaw the majority of Egypt's affairs, but they allowed the Egyptian sultans and ministers to continue governing in Sudan. But years of Egyptian misrule and abuse in the Sudan fueled a popular revolt that was led by a man called Al-Mahdi. Yes, his name was Muhammad Al-Mahdi.
Yes.
So this sparked the Mahdist Revolution, that was an Islamic revolt against the Egyptian government in Sudan. And an apocalyptic branch of Islam, Mahdism, incorporated the idea of this golden age in which the Mahdi would restore the glory of Islam to the earth. I think they were a branch of like Muhammad believers. So the British were hoping to avoid the cost of an intervention, and so they didn't want to interfere. And this left General Gordon with orders to oversee the evacuation of Egyptians from Sudan. But despite these very clear orders to abandon Sudan, General Gordon was determined to beat the Mahdists before they would be able to take over Egypt as well. So he held the defensive line in Khartoum and requested reinforcements from London, but he was completely ignored and denied. And so this siege of Khartoum commenced on March 13th, 1884, when Mahdist forces quickly surrounded the city while Gordon was in need of supplies and troops. So on the 26th, some 50,000 Mahdists stormed the cities, overwhelming the defenders. And the city's army had only been reduced to about 7,000 men. So they were butchered, Gordon was decapitated, and his head was put on a pike. So the question, of course, of this day is, what went wrong? What was the great military blunder in this case?
Absolutely. I don't know about the Gordon's gene. I don't know who told you that. Now, the Mahdi, who was also known as Muhammad Ahmad, was a carpenter and a boat builder. He was divinely inspired to lead his people in jihad against the infidel Egyptian authorities laying claim to the Sudan in the name of Islam. Now, without formal Western training, he managed to amass an army that was capable of overrunning the Egyptian militias and confronting the European forces on an even keel. Now, moreover, he established an intelligence network that kept the foreigners off base and managed to undercut their dominance in the area. On the other hand, Gordon's ideas on Sudan were radically different from Gladstone's. He believed that the Mahdi's rebellion had to be defeated, or he might gain control of the whole of Sudan, and from there sweep over Egypt. Now, on the night of 25th, 26th January, I think that was about 1882, an estimated 50,000 Mahdists attacked the city wall just before midnight. The Mahdists took advantage of the low level of the Nile, fording the river on foot, and rushed around the wall on the shores of the river and into the town. Now, the details of the final assault are a little bit vague, but it is said that by about 3:30 a.m., the Mahdists outflanked the city wall at the low end of the Nile, while another force led by a guy called Al-Nujumi broke down the Masilame Gate, one of Gordon's strongholds. Now, despite taking some casualties from mines and barbed wires laid out by Gordon's men. the entire garrison physically weakened by starvation. These guys were hungry, offered only some patchy resistance, some very small resistance. Within a few hours, they were slaughtered to the last man, as were 4,000 of the town's inhabitants. Now, accounts differ as to how Gordon was killed. According to one version, Mahdist warriors broke into the governor's place.
Yes.
And Gordon came out in full uniform. After disdaining fight, he was speared to death and his head was put on a pike. And apparently, the fate he suffered was actually in defiance of the orders of the Mahdi, who had wanted him captured alive.
Yeah. In fact, there's quite a famous picture of Gordon stepping out of his house.
Yeah.
And the staircase below him is all the Sudanese warriors holding their spears out to him.
Yeah.
And Gordon standing there in shock, like, oh gosh, I didn't think that this would happen.
Yeah.
So, yeah, quite a vivid story.
Absolutely.
Interesting. So, guys, I had never heard about the siege of Khartoum, so I was glad to dig deep into it. What was interesting, I think, is that in the what went wrong, as we're trying to answer what went wrong, I think there were both shortcomings on both ends, right? The government, for the British government, for their negligence, but also their lack of belief in the man that they had sent there. So it said that Lord Evelyn Baring had rejected this man's appointment 2 times, and finally bowed pressure from a man named Lord Granville and said, okay, fine, he might be unsuitable, but we'll take him. And he was they said he was unsuitable, or Baring thought he was unsuitable because he had a record of being flighty and changed his opinions constantly. And then you're sending this man into a context where there had been an Urabi uprising in Egypt in 18, around that time.
Yeah.
So the ground is volatile to begin with. Then you have a man who has been a hero in other contexts, in other wars that he has fought. But when he comes in, he firstly not only underestimates Mahdi, he thinks that Mahdi is just a puppet. In fact, he goes on to say that he's a mere puppet who's trying to galvanize this sort of Islamic ideology and didn't really think that he had an army, not knowing that Mahdi actually had a very effective army on the ground.
Yeah.
The other thing that Gordon made was he had an over-reliance for inexperienced Europeans as opposed to using or employing the Sudanese and Egyptian officials that he actually had at hand, those he was actually meant to evacuate. The other thing is that they say, so it's argued that Gordon's leadership has been seen as the key factor to failure. So he firstly underestimates Mahdi, but then he also had a language barrier issue. So he would rely heavily on telegrams. And so there would be leaks. And so part of his plans would leak because he would need translators to help him send his message or whatever needed to happen. So in terms of defensive priority, it was weak at that time. What was also interesting is that the British had a policy towards Sudan that was really dominated by Egyptian interests. So they didn't have the ground with them. And I think that's also what culminated into his beheading and, their failure, this big blunder. So I'll end with that.
Yeah, JK, you said you did not know about the siege of Khartoum. What did they teach you in group of school?
Really? 1066, the Battle of Hastings. So I want to say this. It's impossible to get anything made or accomplished without stepping on some toes. Enemies are inevitable when one is a doer. Now, Gordon, as much as you love him or hate him, was outspoken and he believed in efficiency. He was a man of action. It cost him, but look, we remember him in history.
Absolutely.
So whatever you do, just get it done.
GK,
yeah.
I know why they omitted this from group of school curriculum. I know, I have the answer. You know how they speak about how when the Haitians had the revolution, it was the only slave rebellion that was ever successful, right?
Yes.
I feel like this is another example of how the natives were able to overthrow the oppression of the Brits.
Yes.
And precisely by, excluding this from our curriculum and the, lessons of history,
of course,
they deny us, the right to know that we do have the ability to do so.
So thank God for the Fifth Estate.
Or we say thank God for 844. I don't know what.
Tuche, that's so right. I mean, that's the most intelligent thing you've said this week.
So on a day where we had a winning headline from the Star, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, but also find us on TV. Go to the and start again.
God bless.